call the meeting to order. Do we have any alternates with us this evening? If not, thank you. Consider approval of meeting minutes. Any questions on those? If not, a motion be in order.
Motion to approve the ways.
Was there a second?
Second, Hayden.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, motion carries. Now's the time for public discussion of any item not on the agenda. Kent, are you aware of anyone that may be on the line that wanted to have some time?
No, I'm not. And while we're waiting for people to jump on, I just wanted to mention that Lori Goodrich was kind enough to join our board when Tom Gill left the Coralville City Council. So I'm happy to see Lori here and welcome Lori to our board. Appreciate it.
You betcha.
Thank you.
Okay. Going to the major items. Administration consider approval amendments to the adopted MPOJC bylaws. Kent.
Yeah, thanks. Kent Ralston, Executive Director. And while I'm going through any of these agenda items tonight, if anybody has any technical problems or can't hear me, just speak up and we'll see if we can get you sorted out. As we discussed at your last meeting, per the adopted MPO bylaws, they're to be reviewed every 5 years at a minimum by a committee of 5 representatives, 4 of which are from the Urban Board and 1 of which is from the Rural Board. Those 5 members that were appointed are our own Terry Donahue, Mayor of North Liberty, Louise Fromm, University Heights Mayor, Megan Foster, Coralville City Council, Pat Hayden, Board of Supervisors, and then Chris Taylor, the Mayor of Swisher. So thanks to those that helped out, very much appreciated. The goal of the committee was, of course, to review the bylaws and report back to the Rural Board as well as the Urban Board. The intent of the request to go through the bylaws was to do so because we need to every 5 years at a minimum, as I mentioned, but we also tasked the group to specifically look at a few different things, one of which was how the ECOG representation, the appointees from this board are sent to ECOG board, as well as just whether or not the rural policy board of the MPO was as effective as it could be, and if we needed to keep that board intact. The bylaws committee met June 29th and developed the recommendations that are in your memo. This board initially supported those recommendations at your last meeting, and then the rural policy board subsequently met November 4th to discuss. I'll go through these recommendations quickly. Of the 4 recommendations, 1 of the 4 was essentially approved by the rural board, and the other 3 were essentially denied or failed. The first point that's in your memo was the recommendation that the county board of supervisors should appoint the citizen representative to ECOG. So you remember, we currently have 3 elected official representatives and then the 1 citizen representative. That citizen representative position is just that. It just has to be a citizen from Johnson County and cannot be an elected official. The idea was that the Board of Supervisors would be able to now appoint that citizen representative rather than have the MPO advertise for that position. The Rural Policy Board did approve that recommendation 5-1, and the consensus was that allowing the Board of Supervisors to make a more strategic appointment would probably yield better results at the ECOG board level. The second bullet in your packet and recommendation was that the Johnson County Board of Supervisors should have 1 permanent representative on the East Central Iowa Council of Governments Board, with the remaining 2 appointments on rotation from the 5 urbanized area communities. So Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, Tiffin, and University Heights. And then the idea was that the rural communities would no longer be part of that rotation. And this was sort of leading us down the path of whether or not the rural board is needed anymore at all. The Rural Policy Board unanimously opposed that recommendation. And generally, the primary objection was that the rural communities simply not wanting to relinquish their ability to sit on the ECOG board. There was a lot of discussion around this, but generally it was just they thought that they needed to continue to represent themselves and not rely so much on a Board of Supervisors position to relay messages to and from ECOG and be able to get the information that they need. The third recommendation was to discuss term limits for the ECOG board, and that the question whether or not they should be increased from 1 to 2 years. So they're currently 1 year. We've heard from a few past representatives that 1 year just isn't long enough. You get your feet wet and then you're right back off of the board. That was also unanimously opposed by the Rural Policy Board, which sort of made sense. If they were going to continue to be on the ECOG board and not relinquish those duties, if we would have switched to a 2-year term limit and the rural communities still be on the ECOG board, they essentially would go from a 1 in every 7-year rotation to about a 1 year in every 14-year rotation. So the way that worked out, it just wasn't really going to make sense the way the board was leaning. And then the fourth recommendation, as I mentioned earlier, was that basically the question on whether or not the MPO board needed to exist. And because of the way the conversation went at the Rural Policy Board meeting, not wanting to relinquish their ability to sit on the ECOG board, of course, not changing the term limits then from 1 to 2 years, it also made sense that the rural board continue to meet and continue to be within our bylaws, so to speak. Again, the idea was just that the urban members thought that they needed an outlet to be able to communicate, to be able to get information, and also the idea that once the Rural Policy Board is dissolved, it would be hard to again assemble one should it ever be needed, I think was the general idea. So given those results of the Rural Policy Board meeting and the wishes of the Board of Supervisors to have more representation on the board, in your memo, I put together an alternative solution, and it's an alternative recommendation to number 2, essentially the second bullet. This would be that 1 elected official seat be filled by the Johnson County Board of Supervisors, and that they would have a representative at all times. And then 1 elected official seat would be filled by the 2nd through 5th largest population entities for MPO. And that's Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, and Solon. So as it's a little bit of a convoluted rotation, as I've mentioned in the past. But right now, Johnson County and Iowa City switch every other year. And then Coralville, North Liberty, and Solon rotate every 3rd year. So what this would essentially be doing is just taking Iowa City and put them into that 3-year rotation, which then becomes a 4-year rotation. And then that would leave all of the the rural communities in the rotation. What I would like to do, and I did speak with Jeff Fruin. I've not spoke with any council members from Iowa City, but I did speak with Jeff Fruin, city manager, about that idea, and he thought, at least at face value, it seemed reasonable, but to be discussed tonight. What we'd like from the board tonight is that you really focus on the alternative recommendation as proposed and give staff direction. I had originally intended that we would vote on the citizen representative portion of this since it was approved by the Rural Policy Board, but I inadvertently left out those bylaws. So the bylaws that are in your packet are actually representative of the alternative solution, not just the simple fact of giving the citizen representative to the county. So I apologize for that. The good news is that if we continue down this path of discussing the bylaws, we would have had to discuss this again in January anyway. So there's really no harm in that, but we'll just defer the vote tonight and I think focus our discussion on what the solution might be. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I know I went through that fast and it's a little bit of a difficult thing to explain. But again, basically the idea is that we would have 1 Johnson County representative and then just slide Iowa City into that every 3-year rotation as it currently is, which then becomes a 4-year rotation. I would venture to guess that the rural board will support this. They would have to vote on this in January as well. But because they're not removed from the rotation in this scenario, and since the Board of Supervisors would have a permanent position, I think they would have better representation than they do today. So if this board chooses to move down that path, I would assume that the rural board would also support that at our January meetings.
Okay, thanks, Kent. Questions or comments?
I just have a question, and I this could be some context maybe. Can you back us up, Kent, and tell us why we, or maybe Pat or Lisa can provide some context here on why the Board of Supervisors will have a representative there each time on ECOG and how we got to this. Seems reasonable to keep it, seems reasonable to move it around a little bit like you're suggesting. So could you just help me understand this history a little bit?
Yeah, I think I can jump in before maybe the supervisor's comment. So in 2011, Chris, that was the last time that the bylaws were really overhauled. And the existing rotation as it is now is essentially based on population. Those with the largest populations, the county being kind of the outlier because they represent everyone. That's sort of how the rotation was put into play. And in 2011, that's when the rural communities really got better representation. In 2016, then when we went through the bylaws, because we need to every 5 years, we didn't change anything. So really the bylaws that we're using today are essentially from 2011. The idea for giving more or a permanent representative to answer your question is, I think the Board of Supervisors, Rod Sullivan specifically, was the county's representative last year. And I think I've mentioned this. And when Rod came off the ECOG board last year, he just mentioned that he thinks not having a consistent presence on the board has been affecting Johnson County negatively as a whole. I did speak with Karen Kurt about this, who's the ECOG director, and she tended to agree, just that the rotation's a little bit difficult. Folks are in and folks are out so often that it's sort of confusing on her end to try and get everybody on the same page, so to speak. So I think the idea, in short, Chris, is just to get a permanent presence there. I think the idea behind this is that the county could, of course, send somebody different every year if they wanted to. But I would anticipate that they would probably leave, that representative on at least for a few years would be my guess. So all in all, short answer is just to get a more consistent representation up at ECOG.
Laura,
Thank you. I remember that.
Pauline?
Yeah, sorry. I remember that conversation about the consistency, and that's what Rod was expressing. Pat or Lisa, is there what is it that you guys feel is being missed if you're not on that board? And I guess, Kent, that might be the only thing that wasn't answered in my question specifically.
This is Pat. I'm going to defer to Lisa just because she's been on the board longer. I obviously have not served on ECI-COG board at all. But as Kent said, Rod has been adamant about this and has been engaged in this discussion for quite a while. And again, just feeling that Johnson County would be better represented if we had a permanent representative on the board. But with that, as I said, not having served on ECI-COG, I'm just kind of finding my way here, and assume, Lisa, you would have more to add.
Lisa?
Not really, but I will say that I think that it had to do with the opportunity to be eligible for grants, but I don't know beyond that. So I agree with any kind of external board that we sit on. Your learning curve happens, and then boy, you rotate off. So it does make sense for it to be a permanent or at least a longer term. But I don't know more of the backstory than what I just said and what Pat said.
And actually, thinking about this meeting today, I approached Rod this morning wanting to see if he wanted to be my alternate for this meeting, knowing that this was on the agenda. And it's the conversation I should have had with him a week ago. He was tied up this afternoon, and his schedule was conflicted and couldn't make it because I knew there would be a lot of questions. And again, my apologies, I can't shed more light on that. But Kent, I think you've done a good job with that.
Yeah, and I think it's not uncommon for supervisors to represent the counties. ECOG represents 8 different counties, and I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe ours is the only one that doesn't have a permanent county seat there. So it is a little bit unusual. Of course, we're a larger county and have more small communities in our county as some of the other ones as well. But I think it's just it's just for consistency's sake. And, if there's not a board of supervisors there, and I mentioned this before, but I don't think the system's broken as it is. But I think if there is a permanent representative from Johnson County there, there is more consistency in the message that we're receiving and the message I think we're giving. If in the off years right now, when Iowa City is not, or excuse me, when Iowa City is the representative rather than the county, there really isn't anyone representing all Johnson County residents, which seems a little bit odd to me, but like I say, it's not broken. I think it's just a tweak that could really help out.
Laura, Pauline, you'd be heavily affected by the change. Any thoughts on your part?
Yeah, I have not served on the ECOG board either as a new counselor. I mean, it seems to me it'd be incumbent on us to lobby the supervisors or just, stay in the know more with that permanent county seat. Functionally, I can't really say what it might mean, but we'd certainly have to make sure we're paying attention and staying engaged. Pauline, do you have experience on the board or have thoughts with your tenure?
Yes, because actually it was in my first year on the council, so I was pretty green to everything, and there was a large learning curve for everything, especially ECOG's board. And I was totally confused at first, but picked up by the end of the term. But then, of course, that was the year, and it was over, and that was the end of it. But I do like the comment that was recently made. I think it was Pat that said that there wouldn't be any entity that's representing the entire county. So I think that having the permanent board of supervisors person serving as the consistent person would be a good idea.
Comments from anybody else?
I would also just quick add, Mayor, that in my discussions with Karen Kurt, I'll be frank with this group. I don't understand a lot of what ECOG does as well. You think we would be sort of closer tied because of what we do and because of who our organizations are. But the honest truth is we really aren't. And that's by design. The reason that the regional planning affiliations like ECOG exist is because the MPO actually can't do work in those areas legally. So we don't work with them as much as you might think. But in my discussions with Karen Kurt, the director, she did mention that the vast majority of work they do are for small communities. So she did have some concern about, moving the small communities out of the rotation, although she understood that the recommendations that came out of the bylaws committee also did help by having a 2-year term. So for her, she was a little bit conflicted because the 2-year terms she thought were good, but, removing the small communities, maybe not so much. I will say, though, that with that, Karen also said that she would do as good a job as they could to reach out to all the communities in Johnson County and make sure that we were informed of opportunities, whether they're grants or otherwise, regardless of how this rotation goes. Just knowing that there's concern in Johnson County about representation, she indicated that her and her staff would try and do maybe a better job or as good a job as they can anyway, just making sure the information gets out, which I think is positive regardless of how the conversation goes.
So basically what I'm hearing is the members here are looking more toward recommendation number 2 and proceed on that in January. Is that correct? Okay, Ken?
Okay. Keep in mind too that because the bylaws require us to give you the correct bylaws 30 days in advance, which I couldn't have given you the alternative recommendation anyway, because the Rural Policy Board just met. So keep in mind that we'll discuss this again in January. I don't think I'll go into the great detail that we're going into for the last few meetings, but there's still time to think about this, talk to your other council members, your city managers and so forth. And if there's a hiccup or if we decide to go a different route, we can of course bring that up in January and take a look at the bylaws again. I'll mention it in the next agenda item because that's when we sort of make our appointments. But the rotation this year really wouldn't be affected by these changes anyway, because it's the county's turn to represent. So Iowa City is on ECOG's board now. They'll come off, and regardless of this conversation, unless we do something completely different, the county's still going to be represented this year. So as I mentioned before, we'll discuss this in January. And there's still time to make some different decisions if need be.
I want to add something. This is Louise. I served on ECOG maybe, I don't know, 4 years ago. something like that. And Doug Elliott was the executive director who had been for years and years, and he gave an orientation that was really got us up to speed a little bit so we could understand it. And I'm sure Karen Kurt does this too, because I've already worked with her. She reaches out to cities and gives a newsletter, and we've done our, we went through goal setting with her, even on Zoom, and it was very helpful. And so they do an orientation that you just get there a little bit earlier. And I learned a lot, and that's why I kept looking up and reading the newsletter and finding out what's up to date for our city, what's available. And so I think they can get us up to date even in a year. That's
Yeah.
all I'd like to say.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Louise. And in the past, Doug Elliott was always good about coming to our January meetings, both the rural and the urban meetings, to give updates on what they're doing and what they offer our communities too. So I'll reach out to Karen as well and make sure that someone on her staff can be available to give us kind of that annual update.
Since you
Okay.
alluded to item B, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, building off that last agenda item, under the bylaws each January, this board appoints 3 elected official representatives, which again, we just sort of talked about, and then the 1 citizen representative. As I mentioned, the citizen representative can be any Johnson County resident that's not an elected official, and the appointments are made according to the rotation that's in your memo. So again, keep in mind that regardless of what we talk about in January with respect to the bylaws, this will still hold true, except for that citizen appointment, because that, it sounds like, will pass, has passed the rural board and will pass this board as well, I think. So the first bullet in your packet, 1 elected official seat will be filled by the 2 largest entities that we've been discussing, the county and Iowa City. Iowa City is the current representative, so the 2021 representative is scheduled to be designated by Johnson County. The second bullet point, 1 elected official seat will be filled by the 3rd through 5th largest entities, which alternate annually. The current seat's held by the city of Coralville, and the 21 representative is scheduled to be designated by the city of North Liberty. And then the 3rd elected official seat will be from the remaining smaller entities who alternate annually. The current seat is held by the city of Tiffin, and the 21 representative is scheduled to be designated by the city of University Heights. And I believe that's continues with the 7-year rotation. And then the last bullet point there I put in bold is that we just had those discussions about the citizen appointment, and come January, I will ask, again, assuming it passes, and I believe it will, I'll ask the Board of Supervisors to go ahead and make that citizen appointment, which would be a change to the current bylaws. I'll make sure to reach out to Johnson County, North Liberty, and University Heights and request that they designate an elected official representative. And then I will bring those back to this board in January, essentially to be ratified. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item C, appoint nominating committee in calendar year 2021 for the Urbanized Area Policy Board officers.
Yeah, thanks. Another item we'll talk about in January, as we do every year, is to elect a chairperson and vice chairperson for the calendar year 21 Urbanized Area Policy Board. The chairperson is responsible for presiding over all meetings. And then, of course, the vice chairperson the vice chairperson would be responsible for those duties when the chair isn't available. What we'd like from the board today is that you consider appointing a 3-person nominating committee for the chair and vice chair for the 21 Urbanized Area Policy Board. And then the nominating committee will report back at your January meeting where we'll seat those 2 positions. As you all know, the mayor of North Liberty, Terry Donahue, is our current chair, and the vice chair is John Thomas from the city of Iowa City. Both the chair and vice chair have served for 1 year, and there's a 2-year maximum term for those positions. And unless there's any questions, I'll just look for volunteers for the 3-person nominating committee, which usually just meets sort of informally and discusses these items. And preferably the 3 would be from different communities.
Volunteers before we draft anybody.
This is Pat. I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
I'll volunteer, Louise.
Thank you, Louise.
And I'll jump in there too then, Mayor.
Very good. I think you have your three.
Yeah, very good. So I'll reach out, Pat, Louise, and Chris with an email just to kind of get you started here within the next week or so.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Next item, preliminary discussion of fiscal year 22 budget.
Yeah, thanks. Prior to preparation of the MPO budget for your consideration in January, it's been my practice just to discuss any proposed changes to the scope of services or operations with the board. Administratively, MPOJC is part of the city of Iowa City with respect to our rules, with respect to our benefits and so forth. And the focus of the MPO remains to fulfill state and federal requirements necessary for our local governments to receive state and federal funds, to produce professional traffic studies and support information to be able to make decisions, both capital and operating, to coordinate transit planning for the 3 transit agencies, and to assist local entities with review of development proposals and traffic impact reports. We also serve as a forum for other regional issues and discussions necessary, although that's become a little bit less important or a little bit less of our focus over the years. Capital expenses for FY22 are expected to be very similar to those in 21, including some replacement schedules for traffic counting equipment, maintenance, software, and so forth. I'm not proposing any additional changes in the level of MPO staffing for 22. We feel good about where we're at. And I believe the increase in our total budget's about 3.9%. At least that's what it looks like preliminarily. I believe it's about $27,000. And of that $27,000 increase out of about a $750,000 budget, I think 80% of that's due to just wages and benefit increases. So really a pretty status quo budget. I anticipate using $230,000 of DOT planning funds as we have in past years. And that keeps the DOT happy with where we're at with our reserve funds for them. And then I also anticipate using about $30,000 of internal reserves that we have to ensure appropriate balance of funds per our internal guidelines. So unless there's any other questions or any questions, I'll be bringing the full budgets back to you in January for approval.
Questions for Kent on the budget?
We're attempting to keep things as flat as we can. We know that, everybody's under some financial pressures right now. So the idea for at least this year and the next few is to try and keep this as flat as we can.
Very good. Okay, moving ahead, transportation planning. Brad, why do we need a amendment to the program?
Well, hello, everybody. This is Brad Newman, Associate Transportation Planner. This amendment should look pretty familiar to you since you approved it back in May for the FY20 to 23 TIP. Unfortunately, when we made the amendment, it did not automatically carry over to the FY21 to 24 TIP. And this is in the new DOT system that they track these programs. So the only way to fix it is to reapprove the same amendment we did in May, just for the FY21 TIP. And of course, this is for Iowa City's IWV project, IWV road. It's to add a water main between the IWV road and the Iowa City landfill. It just makes it easier to do those 2 projects. The wording has to match up to the contract with the DOT. So here we are again, we're trying to just fix the problem here. And it's just, we have to reapprove for FY21. The technical advisory committee did review it and they unanimously approved to go ahead and approve that amendment. So are there any questions? I know it gets kind of confusing, but it's really just cleaning up within the DOT system.
Okay, now's the time for a public hearing and consideration of amendment to the adopted 21 through 24 MPOJC Transportation Improvement Program, otherwise known as TIP. Did we receive any written communications on that, Kent?
We did not.
Okay, anyone online outside that wishes to make comment? Having received no comments, call the public hearing to a close. We ask the group to establish the amendment to the adopted plan as noted. Anyone wish to establish that amendment?
This is Chris. I'll adopt that.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Hayden.
Thank you. All those in favor, thumbs up. I see basically unanimous agreement. Amendments passed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can't consider approval of safety targets and performance measures for the MPO as required by the FHA.
Yeah, thanks. This will sound sort of familiar to some of you as well. As you might recall, the Federal Highway Administration now requires the MPOs set targets for 5 safety performance measures as part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program and report them to the state DOT in February of each year. For each of those 5 measures that are shown in your memo, we need to choose one of the following options. We either need to choose to support the state's targets or essentially come up with our own targets. And this is the same as what we've done. I think this is the 3rd year now. Similar to the safety target setting, the FHWA also requires the MPO set targets for pavement and bridge and system reliability performance measures as part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program and report those to the state DOT as well. In 2018, we don't do this annually, but back in 2018, the MPO unanimously chose to support the state's 2- and 4-year targets that are noted in your memo. Since that time, and as part of the state's 2-year review, the DOT actually made changes to the adjusted 4-year targets that are circled in the memo. So those are person miles traveled and truck travel time reliability. Because they made those midstream changes, we need to also decide whether we will support the state's targets or whether we will come up with our own. Similar to past years, I recommend that we again adopt the state's targets. If at any time we decide that it benefits us here locally to create our own targets, we can do that. We have that opportunity every year. But at this time, just as I've mentioned in years past, we just don't see the upside to producing our own targets at this point in time. It's fairly tedious, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how you even go about doing that with some of these measures. When it comes to truck time, travel, reliability, and those sorts of things, it gets a little bit difficult. So again, we would recommend adopting the state's targets for both of these. I have included in your memos the DOT's information on how they actually set these targets, if you're so inclined. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, we're looking for a motion from the board to adopt the state's targets. I should mention quick, I guess also there's no downside to adopting the state's targets right now that we see, as I mentioned. There's also no penalties if we don't meet those targets. So when we put projects in our local transportation improvement program, we have to make sure we're trying to help meet those targets, especially the safety targets, which we do. We've got safety criteria in our grant applications and other things that, that help support these. So we mention that in both our transportation planning work program as well as our long range plan that we're currently working on. But at this point, there's really no penalty for not meeting those targets either. There might be in the future, but there currently are not.
Further questions or comments? Therefore, I would ask the board to establish a motion to approve the safety targets and performance measures for the NPO as required by the Federal Highway Administration. Anyone wish to establish that motion?
I'll make that motion. Laura Burgess.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Douglas.
Thank you. Any final questions? All in favor, please raise your thumb for approval. Unanimously approved.
Thank you.
Okay, consider approval of Surface Transportation Block Grant, STBG, and Transportation Alternative Program, TAP, scoring criteria for funds allocated by MPOJC. Emily, your turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Emily Bothell, Senior Associate Transportation Planner. At your September meeting, if you'll recall, we presented the attached Surface Transportation Block Grant and Transportation Alternatives Program scoring criteria for review in advance of the MPO's STBG and TAP funding cycle early next year. At that meeting, the board had indicated a desire to give credence to stormwater management practices under the environment criteria. And I attached the draft scoring criteria, which is reflective of this change for your review. There are now 3 points available for a project that includes stormwater management practices. At their November 10th meeting, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee did unanimously recommend approval of the revised criteria. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the criteria. Otherwise, we are looking for approval of this tonight.
Questions about this, because it usually is every year. I didn't know you wanted to go home that early. Questions or comments? If not, would anyone wish to establish the motion to approve that for scoring criteria?
So moved, Hoffman.
Thank you.
Second, Taylor.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your thumb. Very good. Motion passes unanimously. Consider approval of several elements of the MPOJC Long Range Transportation Plan revision. Emily again.
So at the September Policy Board meeting, the board had concurred with the plan's overall vision and guiding principles. But as I stated with the previous agenda item, the board had indicated a desire to give credence to stormwater management practices under the environment scoring criteria. The vision, guiding principles, and scoring criteria are in your memo for consideration. Please be aware that we are asking the board to approve the scoring criteria for the long-range transportation plan projects separate from the scoring criteria for the STBG and TAP applications. This is because while the criteria has been the same for each of these functions in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be the same moving into the future. So it's an opportunity to approve the scoring criteria for projects to be included in the plan. At their November 10th meeting, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the vision, guiding principles, and scoring criteria. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about any of those.
Questions or comments for Emily? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the several elements of the MPOJC Long Range Transportation Plan revision, the subgroups of vision, guiding principles, and scoring criteria. Anyone wish to establish that motion?
I'll establish that motion.
Thank you.
Lori.
Is there a second?
I'll take care of that, Terry.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Final discussion or question? All those in favor signify with a thumb. Motion approves unanimously. Thank you, Emily. Okay, discussion regarding the pending needs assessment for the required MPOJC Long Range Transportation revision. Emily.
So this winter, we'll be conducting a needs assessment, asking staff from each of your communities to submit capital transportation infrastructure projects to be considered for inclusion in the 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan. So this would include projects for which communities anticipate potential use of federal funds. Upon receiving each community's list of priority projects, we will then screen the projects to determine if they are eligible for inclusion using the criteria that's listed in your memo. After that, we will then host a series of public input opportunities, allowing the public to comment on the projects submitted. The projects will also be scored by staff using the just approved scoring criteria. And then these scores and the public input will be brought back to the Technical Advisory Committee and the Policy Board for final review and approval. This fiscally constrained list of projects will then be included in the Long Range Transportation Plan, which will be adopted in May of 22. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about this project or about this process. Otherwise, I will be in touch with staff from each of your communities. It is a big task that we're asking staff to identify project needs out to 2050. So we try to give them plenty of time to do so.
Question for Emily. Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next item, update on Metro Trail Count Program. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. This is Sarah Walls, Associate Transportation Planner. Every year between May and October, we conduct bicycle counts along the regional trail system. This is done with an infrared device, and the device does not distinguish between bicyclists and pedestrians, so it's a combined count. We select the location in consultation with our TBC members, and in the cases of most communities, that's your recreation director. A number of factors influence the count. Again, it's just a 1-week count. For a few of these, we did manage to count at 2 different times during the year. But it's a 1-week count, and what you're seeing is the average daily count represented. And these are influenced by a lot of things. If the weather is particularly hot or wet, we might see fewer riders. If it's beautiful and there's nothing interrupting the trail, like a downed tree or road construction, we'll see more riders. So on the following pages, you can see the counts that we did. Anecdotally, we had been hearing that, and we were observing that there were more people out on the trails. And I think what you'll see in the counts is that there really were, and we believe that to a large extent, this was probably due to COVID with school out, with gyms closed or people feeling reluctant to go to gyms, and many of our recreation programs were closed as well. People were really looking for those outdoor opportunities and seized upon the trail system. So this is one of those things where the trails really prove their usefulness to communities, that during this very difficult time, people really sought out our trails for recreation. So you're seeing those big jumps in the numbers. Now, that's a great thing that people are out there finding the trails. Those numbers might settle down a little bit over the coming year, but I think people really appreciate the trail system that our communities have built for them.
You get the feeling that some of these numbers are a little overinflated because of the COVID crisis?
Yeah, it would be unusual. I mean, to see that kind of a jump, and I think COVID. I mean, I think we believe that COVID probably contributes to it. I mean, we certainly were hearing from Parks and Recreation directors and other folks that usage was up. One comment that we did get at the TAC meeting was, someone had a question about that Clear Creek Trail count, being down. We did 2 counts out there, and the spring one was down, and then the fall way up. And we have no way to know, but I would attribute something like that to, in the spring, we saw those university students who live out that way in graduate housing and such. When school was closed early, we would have lost all those folks. And I think people were maybe a little trepidatious in the spring, but as summer wore on and then into fall, I think people were really getting out on the trails.
Any questions for Cheryl? Comments?
I would just quick comment that I think we all know that all our communities have done an extremely good job of building, especially our off-street network, our trail network over the years. But I think this just goes to show how important they are, and that we all knew what we were doing when we needed it the most. Now that COVID's here and people need a break, so I think that's a good job done by all.
Good, good. Okay, anything else, Sarah?
Not on that topic.
We come to other business, discuss the Severson Charity Challenge for the holiday season.
So this is
the year that's needed. This is it.
Yeah. Well, so most of you are probably aware that every year the staff of the communities in the MPO engage in this charity challenge that was named after Linda Severson, who was the MPO's Human Services Coordinator until 2011 when she passed away. And as part of that challenge, each community has every year chosen a charity to raise money for, and most of the communities have chosen to raise money for the local food pantries. This year, we think that effort is going to be difficult. The staff at our member communities are facing the same challenges as the larger community, working from home, school, kids going to school from home, and in many cases, we've got a lot of furloughed staff. So it's going to be tough. And so with this in mind, your MPO staff, it wants to propose an alternative to this traditional fundraising challenge. And we're calling it the Severson Trails to Table Challenge. And so what we're proposing to do, our staff, our MPO staff, is during the months of December and January, we are proposing to walk, run, and bike the more than 100 miles of trails and side paths in Johnson County, with the goal of raising funds for our local food banks, the food bank in Iowa City, North Liberty, and Coralville. Our motivation is threefold: to support food assistance that is critically needed this year, to encourage people to engage in safe, healthy outdoor activities that will be good for their physical and their mental health. It's going to be real hard these next 2 months. And we also want to raise aware of what you're now aware of from our trail counts, the remarkable system of trails that our city leaders and our taxpayers have paid for, and that reach into every neighborhood in the metro. And so what we would do is, through social media, we will post weekly or twice weekly rides. We'll take you along with us, runs and walks, I should say. We'll take you with us with videos, maps, and photos. And we'll provide a link. We're going to work with the Community Foundation of Johnson County, where people can easily donate, make donations, financial donations. And that's what we're going to do. And then what we would like our member communities to do is to share the links to our, our social media posts and to the donation site. And we also invite you, the staffs at our communities and the public in general, to get out there with us. And there'll be ways for them to post photos with tags to the challenge, and to share their favorite trails or routes that are newly discovered by them. So it's really to get the whole community out walking and getting out on those trails during this most difficult season that we're facing, and at the same time raising funds for the local food banks.
Questions for Sarah on this one?
Sarah, can you record that so we can replay it at every single city council meeting?
There you go.
We will
Wow.
provide a write-up of what we're doing. I mean, we're tweaking some ideas, and even we think, even from the planning perspective, we're going to be able to use some of the things that we do for some of our work here at the MPO. But yes, I would be happily do whatever you think is necessary to get people to participate. And I think the more people who can share, and even if you just do one walk during the season, if you share it and let people know that you enjoyed it and what you enjoyed, I think it will inspire other people to get out too. And then of course, if you share the link, even a small donation counts.
Well, I can tell you for one thing, Terry and I will not be able to do your comments justice at the next council meeting. So
No.
I'll happily record it, or whatever you want me to do. If you think it was worthwhile, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome.
You record it, we'll play it.
Okay.
No, I think
Very creative.
I think this is a really good alternative to the typical Severson Charity Challenge, which, I'm sad that we can't do this year, but just by way of how Iowa City raised funds is with which is where the MPO staff typically spends our time. It was just social by nature and it's just not appropriate this year. So Sarah primarily has come up with this. I think it's a great idea. And she'll share it's probably going to be a GoFundMe site or something similar.
It'll actually just be through the Community Foundation of Johnson County.
Yeah, it'll be transparent and it'll be, I think it'll be fun. I'm just hoping for warm weather when I'm out there January riding my bike.
Yeah, we're counting on Kent to do a lot of the miles, so.
I agree. I think, Sarah, that's a wonderful idea. When you didn't have a written report, I was nervous of what we were going to do because I kept trying to figure out what we could do. So this is wonderful. Thank you. And I think you might be at our December meeting and maybe you can just say it at our meeting in December.
Sure.
It'd be great.
Yeah, send me an email, Louise, about that meeting and I'll get it on my
I
schedule.
certainly will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll make sure to get all that information out to your city clerks. So, and others.
And your communication people, yeah.
Right.
Anything else, people? If not, thank you for your time, attendance, stay safe, don't overindulge, and a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So
Motion
moved.
to adjourn, Louise.
Second, Taylor.
There you go. All those in favor, signal aye.
Aye.
Yeah, that's it.
Hi.
Aye.
Good night, good people. Take care.
Bye.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you very much.